Yeah, I've like said this before, I'll say it again. Like artists are like what make Instagram like interesting. Hey Vesper.
Yeah, Vesper agrees.
Obviously. Just like singing along. Just
Yeah.
Welcome to Nerdlandia.
Welcome to Nerdlandia. It's the show that takes a list of all these different interests and puts it on shuffle. I'm your host, Emily Case Buskirk. Today's episode is a fantastic reminder that you can always go back to an old interest. Aaron Geringer is a mental health therapist living in St. Peter, Minnesota. He recently reconnected with his love for pottery and has been sharing his work on the social media page Ontology Clay. Aaron draws his inspirations from a lot of places, both in the community art studio he works in and in the far-flung reaches of the internet. And he always has music fueling him in the studio, too. We talk about what he's been listening to lately, his personal approach to the craft, and his thoughts on why spending time at the pottery wheel is such a therapeutic practice. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today. I cannot wait to hear about your pottery work.
Yeah, and thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, full disclaimer, I had to look up the word ontology. Your pottery work is called Ontology Clay, and for others who might not know what that means, here's the definition. It's the branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of being, which I think is super interesting. What made you choose that name?
In part, is kind of a nod to just like my educational roots. You know, you and I both went to a liberal arts college. I work at a liberal arts college now. And it also comes from back when I took my first ceramics class, which was 10 years ago now, at Hastings College. There was one lecture that our professor gave that really stuck with me. He talked about Plato's allegory of the cave and kind of talked about how one of the themes in that story, essentially, or the allegory, is this idea of forms and our conceptions of what true or ideal forms are. And so if you're familiar with the allegory of the cave, my way of paraphrasing part of that is that there are prisoners in a cave and they see shadows on the walls because they're facing the wall. They can't see what's casting the shadow, the light's coming in behind them, and they're not in the external world to see what these animals or objects are that are casting the shadows. So they see these shadows, and that's their understanding of reality. Later on in the story, when some of the prisoners are released or they get out and they actually see the things that were casting the shadows, it just kind of blows their mind. They're like terrified because what was true for them inside is not really true outside. But anyway, all that being said, it's this idea that there isn't really an ideal form or ideal concept or true form that exists in reality, but we all have kind of this mental template that there is kind of that does exist. So if you think, for example, I have a mug, because of course I'm a ceramicist. You think about like what makes a mug a mug. And so you and I could probably list some things. Maybe it has to have a handle. Okay, well, maybe there's mugs without handles, so it just has to look like a cup.
Also, I will interrupt and say my mug does not. So
yeah, exactly.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I just thought that was perfect.
No, please. Yeah, please. So yeah, the idea is, I guess in the work, what I like to do is try to, so like with this mug, for example, I know they can't see it on the podcast, but like it looks a lot different. And so one of my goals is to make things that are maybe kind of breaking our conceptions of what makes it a mug, but still keeping enough characteristics in it that makes it a functional device. So anyway, that's part of it, but also I don't like making the same thing over and over. I like making a lot of variations. And so maybe this idea of like, if there's an ideal form, it's just kind of the medium or the average of everything I'm making, if that makes sense. That was a lot. But that's, I think, the most rambly answer I'll have to give for this.
No, I love that. I mean, because I think, I mean, at its essence, like pottery is making something out of blobs. I don't want to
Yeah,
say nothingness because it is a thing, but
yeah,
yeah, you're like literally taking this earth and this like unshaped material and you're creating something that has a function. So I guess that's how I connect with it and understand it.
yeah. So when you think of the word ontology, not only is it fun to say, but it's also it's a very contemplative activity, I find. So it just really gets you thinking about a lot of different things. So
Yeah, well, and I guess like your explanation kind of got my brain going of bigger questions of like identity as well, and like, you know, our role in society, what's expected of us. And to me, it's like interesting to think about maybe how we conform to that or how we rebel against that. And yeah, just kind of that ebb and flow as well.
yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think the cool thing about the word ontology too is that anyone who looks at it, like, it sparks kind of like a different line of thinking or meaning for them too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've seen some photos of your clay studio that you've been working at recently ever since you reconnected with pottery. How did you, find that studio and really get plugged into that?
It was just kind of happenstance. I got into ceramics, like I said, my when I was in college, my last semester too, which I kind of was my biggest regret that I didn't get into it sooner. And then I just didn't really see an accessible way to get back into it because I mean, I didn't know how to like make my own studio. It's expensive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking into what our art center offered because I knew they had a studio, and for some reason it took me 10 years. And I've lived in St. Peter now for, I think, about 6 years. For whatever reason, it took me that long to actually look into it. And their prices are so affordable. So I started with, they did a beginning ceramics class. Well, they do it a couple times a year. And I did that a year ago today, almost. And it was like a class that met twice a week for over a month. And I think it was only $50 for the class, which included all the materials, which
Oh, wow.
was incredible. Yeah. And staying on as a renter is $60 a month. You still have to buy your own clay, but you can use all the recycled clay in the studio. So when people like make mistakes or like the things they carve out and they're not using, they go into like bins for repurposing, and that is included in the rent.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
it's an incredible deal. Like you think about some studios, other places, and you hear the prices, it's unheard of. So support your local art centers.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just so nice that they're like so supportive of locals who want to be creative and might not have most money to go towards that, but they can still like make that happen. That's really amazing. There's a local deluxe you might know of in Lincoln, and they have some classes. I've been wanting to do it. This a conversation might inspire me to actually take more steps toward that. But for me, in high school, I got to do pottery. And so I can't remember, one or two classes with that, and I liked it. And I never did it at Hastings, but I was able to, maybe go hang out with a friend after hours in the studio and throw some pots. And it's just always such a wonderful experience. I love the the tub of clay. Like it just feels like so like visceral and wonderful, and it's like mud but
Yeah,
artsy. Yeah, it's just so
I
nice.
agree with all that. Yeah, and yes, it was great. It was a great introduction back then, and having friends in the studio was such a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. So a random thing I was wondering about for you in the studio, are there any favorite albums or playlists that are like fueling your creativity or helping you pass those hours?
I take music very seriously.
Good,
So
as it should be.
I thought a lot about this question. For anyone who's on Instagram, if you find my account, it's literally Ontology Clay. You'll see that pretty much all of my posts, I have like a song put on there. And so 99% of the time, that's a song that I had been listening to at some point in the process. If you want a little like playlist idea, you can look at my account. But albums, there's a lot of good music coming out this year. So
Yes.
some that I wrote down, I have 4 here that I've been really into lately.
All right, let's hear it.
I'm going to try my hardest on some of these names. The first artist I have is Waxahachie, which I learned is a town in Texas, I think.
Oh, amazing.
Sounds like it has indigenous roots. Her album Tiger's Blood, it's incredible.
Yes. That's one I've really been listening to a lot.
Oh, yeah, good. Okay, great. That's affirming.
It's one of my favorites right now, honestly. And so, sorry to like interrupt, but I need to get your thoughts on this because in my head, I'm calling it alt country. I don't know how to define like the genre or if it needs a definition. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you on all of that. And actually, one of my favorite genres of music, I mean, I'm kind of eclectic, but it's kind of that alt country where it's like country with like a nod to like classic country and like Americana, folksy kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So maybe you've heard of this other artist.
We'll see.
I have Sierra Farrell.
No, I have not heard that one.
Or maybe it's Farrell, I don't know. But you'll have to look her up.
Okay.
She is incredible. And her album is called Trail of Flowers. She's also kind of like same genre. The next one is Vampire Weekend, Only God Was Above Us.
Okay, I haven't listened to that one yet, but obviously, yeah, some Vampire Weekend, always a great time.
They're one of my all-time favorites. Yeah, it's probably not my favorite album of theirs, but I love it still, and I'm going to see them this summer, so I'm so excited about that.
Nice.
And then the last one, so I started listening to this because of all the like hate that people were spewing out there. I would have listened to it anyway. I'm not going to kid you, but Beyonce's new album, Cowboy Carter.
Oh, yeah. Okay, what are your thoughts?
I love it. And it's such a great album because it pushes boundaries of genres in so many different ways, but also it's just like a beautiful collaboration of a bunch of different artists and also nods to classics while also weaving in a lot of Black American history and also how country has its roots in Black American artists.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Whether or not people want to acknowledge that or not.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. And her voice is just amazing. It showcases a lot of the qualities of her voice, which I love.
Yeah, we might have to like make a playlist or something.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about that like kind of folky music is it's like perfect when you're working with clay and like earth. So it's kind of like comes full circle in that way.
That's amazing. I didn't even think of that. Yes, I love the connection there. You already mentioned coming back to your clay practice after spending nearly a decade away from it. So can you just fill in a little more details on how you first discovered the art form and then what made you come back to it?
Yeah, I loved the class so much when I took it in college. And like I said, I regretted that I had waited to my last semester just because I loved it so much more than I thought. And I remembered like I spent so many extra hours in the studio, even working on things that I didn't need to do for the class. And in my own mental health journey in college, that was the first time I saw a counselor for myself. I saw Stephanie Pershing. She was one of the counselors who...
Yes. She is incredible.
But the last semester, and I really think it's because I was spending so much time in the studio, was the time I needed counseling the least. So I just knew that it was like so beneficial for my mental health. And so anyway, like, 10 years later, I've just been kind of like looking for opportunities. And I think the trigger was one of the goals that I made that I was really proud of. This was probably February of last year. My partner had set it in a windowsill and kind of forgot about it. And the dog jumped up on the window to like yell at someone who was walking by and it broke. And I was like upset because I thought like I'll never be able to make something that great again. And then I decided, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be thinking that way. Maybe I should actually do something about this. And that's, I think, when I pulled up the webpage for the local art center and looked at like how to get involved with ceramic studio.
I love that because I think it can be so easy for us to tell ourselves these stories of like, yeah, that was a great thing, but I'll never have a chance to do that again. But sometimes opportunities and creative opportunities are more in our reach than we think.
Totally.
So yeah, I think that's why I really appreciate that story is like even if you're away from a thing that you've loved, you can always come back to the thing. And I think I mean for me like as a musician, I put like so much pressure on myself of like, oh man, well I'm never going to be able to play something like super complicated ever again, but it's like as long as you're just playing something that makes you happy, then why do you need to like, I don't know, set all these like requirements for yourself? So
Yeah, no kidding.
it's also like just amazing to get to see like your journey too because I don't know, at least to me, like looks like you've probably like already blown your college self's like abilities out of the water.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. Definitely college self, and even myself, like a year ago today, or whenever I started the class. It does take a lot of practice. There were times I was in the studio last summer, in particular, where I really felt like I was going to give up because it's kind of like you have to pass this threshold with your skill where everything you're throwing on the wheel stops falling apart. You just have to expect that's part of the process. You have to let yourself make mistakes and be really patient.
I feel like that can be so applicable to like so many things also.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's so much like easier said than done, but always a good reminder.
Yes.
You also mentioned kind of some overlap even between mental health and mindfulness and throwing clay. And you're now a mental health therapist. So I feel like you're actually in a really good position to speak to this. But what are your thoughts on how those all like connect and play off of each other?
One thing I love about, I think it's true for people who hand building, which is not using the wheel to make pottery, like just making it by hand or other tools versus using like the wheel, obviously. There are people that kind of are more one camp than the other, and then there's some that integrate both. But I think that there's a lot of elements of mindfulness for both. I also think about with the wheel, especially, you do have to be paying attention. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. I'm sure you can imagine like things fly off the wheel or like fall apart easily if you're not careful. And just having like spatial awareness. I'm not someone who's like I'm pretty clumsy. Like I trip easily, I bump into things. And that was part of the learning curve too, like just having the spatial awareness and not accidentally like putting my hand somewhere it doesn't belong or it shouldn't be, like you ruin your piece. But anyway, so there's a lot of mindfulness and kind of in this world where we want to keep up with so many things at once, or we're like constantly multitasking, constantly on our phone while doing other things. The nice thing about working on the wheel is it does require your full attention.
Yeah.
And so it's a way to kind of couple the creativity aspect with mindfulness. And there's a plethora of research that shows that, of course, mindfulness has so many health benefits for mental and physical health, as well as having creative outlets and building resiliency. I could also say things about how pottery is an excellent lesson in like letting yourself make mistakes in order to learn. So
Yeah.
I've learned the more I try to be a perfectionist and like finesse things past the point of what they need to be finessed, that's when you ruin your pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like letting your stuff be good enough. They don't have to be perfect because that's when you ruin things. And then I'll also say recently, so yesterday was a month ago that we said goodbye to my dog Obi, which I know that you know because you had sent a really nice.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah. There are good days and bad days. We're still processing through it. But one thing that I found really helpful was just really having time in the studio to both kind of give myself a sense of purpose, because we know with grief, if you have a sense of purpose, that's a really helpful way to work through it and process it, but also kind of a way to take a break from having to think about it and talk about it too. So it kind of serves both purposes. In a nutshell, like those are my main ideas for mental health.
Oh, yeah. You need to do an entire TED Talk on this. That would be amazing. Like you said, really the part where you have to like really pay attention and really be super intentional in shaping the clay. I think there's like really something to that. And I also saw this really interesting article that the New York Times was like summarizing some research that had been done about specifically doing things with your hands and how that is helping people with their mental health and cognitive ability. I guess when I say it out loud, it feels so obvious, but some of the details that went into was super interesting to read about.
I'd love to read that article, but I believe it. I totally believe it.
Yes. It's like amazing to have something that you can do that's not staring at a screen. And I think it's like so important to have that in your daily life. For me, since I love cooking so much, that has been like just a great way to transition into my post work part of the day and get to be creative a little bit. Having a thing where you're not like tapping a screen or staring at a screen, I think is just like super, super great to have.
Yeah, I totally feel that way.
Also, when I was like writing up these questions, I sometimes I just get like the most random thoughts in my head. And one of those thoughts was like, for you and you're like in the studio looking at a lump of clay, how do you decide what shape that is going to become?
Yeah. And this was probably one of my favorite questions to think about. And I think I have a general idea of what I want to make when I'm starting. Like, okay, obviously it's a different process to make a plate versus like a bowl or a mug.
Yeah.
So I think you kind of have to have a starting point, but still, like, I don't always know at the end, like, if what I'm making is going to be a vase, a cup, a mug. I kind of wait to see the end result, but also along the way, you're negotiating with what the clay wants to become when it's on the wheel.
Yes.
And I think maybe some people would argue part of that is just like the matter and like what the clay is made up of and how the elements are distributed and how that combines with the wheel spinning. But also you're interacting with it, whether you make something like do something really well, or if you make a mistake and then you have to correct that, or if you decide, oh, I like that mistake and I'm working with it. And there's times that I'm working with clay and I'm like, I'm making a mug today and it just wants to really like flare out and become a bowl. And I have to go with that.
Yeah.
But also when I'm making, you've probably seen the like fun shapes that I make. It's kind of like, I don't know all the technical terms, but when I have my hands in the piece that I'm making and I'm trying to push some of the clay out to shape it, I might not know in the moment if I'm making more of a sphere or just kind of like a little wave. Or one thing I've enjoyed doing is kind of making these ridges.
Yeah.
And so just kind of,
for sure.
it's just kind of like how it's unfolding in the moment. I'm just kind of negotiating with helping it along the way, which can end nicely and sometimes it ends in disaster.
No, I love that so much.
And I also don't like making the exact same thing and trying to replicate it, because when I try to do that, maybe it comes with skill levels. Some people who like production work where they're making like the same thing over and over and it's like very uniform. I think that requires a lot of skill.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that skill and I'm not interested in that skill because I just like things being so different.
Yeah, no, and it's awesome because I think every single potter is going to have their own approach to it, and there are some artists I follow who have that like production ability, and like they still have their own style that they bring in their unique designs, and it's still really awesome. But I can also really appreciate that you just want to embrace the uniqueness of the specific experience you had while you were at the wheel, and I think that's awesome. And for you as a ceramicist, do you have any particular inspirations or I guess other artists that you look up to? Anything like that?
One of the beautiful things about social media, I mean, I think it can be used in unhealthy ways. I'm not going to say it's all perfect and all great.
Right.
It's not always great for your mental health. But what I love about it is that it has really helped me connect with a plethora of artists of different mediums, but especially ceramics, and just kind of see, again, when we're talking about like the concept of like ideal forms, just like see how other artists out there are kind of pushing the boundaries and negotiating with those boundaries, I guess, and making just really cool things. So the ceramicist who first inspired me, I feel like I'm giving an Oscars acceptance speech here, but um,
Go right ahead.
so I want to thank my teachers, my original ceramics teachers, AJ Clay. He was one of the teachers, and then Sean Bagley. They were both the instructors when I took the intro course last year. And so, of course, I have a lot of credit to give both of them in helping me learn things. And their work also is just incredible. Like, they both have their own unique styles. So it's really cool to see how they've established themselves as artists. One person I don't know personally. I've never met this person. I just know them through social media. Dara Schumann Ceramics. But I love her work, and she's kind of the person who I first started seeing these ridges, and I don't have one that I've completed that's come through the firing yet, but just kind of like, I don't know the technical term to describe it, just like layering some of the clay out to make like rings around the vessel or piece that you're making. When you see her work, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's just like, when I saw her work, I was like, I've seen nothing like this. This is incredible. I didn't know that this was possible. I want to try to do some of that in my work. So there's other people too that I found kind of like that, but I think this person gets a special shout out because I just am so amazed by her work. So
That is awesome. Yeah, I think basically I've stayed on Instagram like way more than I would have otherwise. Like, I mean, the artists make it all worth it for me,
yeah,
like just finding so much inspiration from artists of like all disciplines too, and like even doing interesting like multidisciplinary work. Yeah, it's really cool to hear about the inspirations that you're able to draw both from local sources and from social media. And you also said that you've been in Minnesota for a little while now. So what kind of inspiration and creative support have you been able to find where you currently live?
if my partner was here, Charlie is a man of all trades. He is currently in the Twin Cities working with a bell choir that he directs up there.
Oh wow.
So
That is so cool.
yeah, well, he's a huge musician, but anyway, he can give the spiel so much better than I can because his art is literally his job too. He is the director of the Carnegie Arts Center in Mankato. I think he says we are the only state that has funding for the arts like written in the state constitution. There is government funding and like a lot of great opportunities for artists in the area. So in terms of statewide, that's what's unique about Minnesota, but also as a part of that, and I think due to a lot of other various factors. So I live in a town called St. Peter. It's pretty small. We're close to a town called Mankato, which is where Charlie works, and it's close enough that we spend a lot of time in both. But there's a lot of great art communities. So there's a lot of art and like art exhibitions and opportunities to interact with artists. Like last weekend was the art crawl in Mankato, and they'll do one in St. Peter at some point. So there's a lot of both just with the thriving communities and then being married to someone who that's like their job, working on programming for arts and for communities. I've found a lot of ways to connect with people. And then also just the other renters at the studio that I work at are all very talented, all very generous and willing to kind of like answer questions, like seeing their work. Both of the teachers that I mentioned who taught the course, and one of them, AJ, is the studio manager. So he's always around and answers questions. And even though I'm not in like a class anymore, he still offers to teach me things from time to time. Like he taught me how to make a teapot, and at some point in the future,
Oh wow.
pitcher.
It's just like really heartwarming to hear about that. And I had no idea that Minnesota got so much support as a state for it. Even in the Midwest, there's all of these great little hubs for connection, for creativity, and to support artists. It's always like nice to hear those specific examples.
Yeah, totally. Love the Midwest.
So you were also, talking about like the nerve-wracking process of trying to keep pieces intact and from breaking. So that's a really good segue into another question I had. And that was inspired by a quote that you shared about your work. And so you said, sort of like watching Game of Thrones, you don't want to get too attached to your favorite characters because there's a good chance they get killed along the way. And that made me laugh. Is there like a particular story that inspired that, or what's the backstory to that?
The nice thing is some of the most devastating moments, especially early on, like this, like over last summer when I was really kind of on my own, trying to build my skills. It's really easy to think like I don't know, expect that you're going to be able to keep all your work. And actually, one person I took a workshop with before I enrolled in this class that I took a year ago said that when they were in school, their ceramics teacher didn't let them keep any of their work until 100 pounds of clay had passed through their hands. Because you are going to make mistakes. It does take a lot of, especially with ceramics and wheelwork, there's so many variables that things either fall apart on the wheel, or when you're trimming, which is the part when after it's dried for a while, when you've made a piece on the wheel, you can like take it off of the bat is like the round thing that it like sits on. You take it off of that, turn it upside down, and make the bottom of it look nice, and also take off extra weight from the clay. But if you're not careful, you can cut through the bottom, and now your mug has a hole in it. Or if things aren't securely attached to the wheel when you're trimming, this is one of the most devastating ones for me. There's little pins on the wheel. Basically, they look like nuts, like hardware nuts that you attach the bats to in the wheel. But those are dangerous because if things hit those, like fly off and hit those, it's like I don't know, blender or chopper, like your piece is shredded. So even just 2 weeks ago, I dropped one of my pieces when it was wet, and so it broke. Anyway, all that being said, there's so many little like mishaps or variables, even like with glazing, like so many things that you have to learn about, all the variables that impacts the outcomes. You kind of have to make some of the mistakes in order to learn the lessons, I guess, and kind of learn how to avoid them or try to avoid them in the future.
For sure.
So yes, you can't get too attached because things break easily, and accidents happen. This is another kind of mental health piece. One of the therapies that I'm trained in using is called acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the tenets in that is that if we are not careful of being mindful of our expectations, or if our expectations are too rigid or too strict and not realistic, we're less resilient with outcomes, or we're less happy or satisfied with outcomes. So if I go in expecting that my pieces are all going to come through perfectly at the end, I'm going to be very disappointed because that's not what happened. But when I thought about, okay, when I was watching Game of Thrones, I learned you don't want to get too attached because those lead to some of the most devastating deaths, and you're very disappointed. The same thing just kind of applied. Like, you want to be proud of your work, but also from kind of like a good distance in case it's gonna get hacked up.
Yes. Amazing life lessons through brutal clay carnage, I guess.
Exactly.
And it's really hard to like hear that as an artist, like thinking about how like heart-wrenching that has to be sometimes. But it's, it also just happens. It happens in so many different things. And I think even like learning how to even like get over that and sometimes laugh at that is pretty key.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I agree with that. Laughing at it, being able to laugh and not take it too seriously. There's a lot of value in that.
That leads us into our recurring ending segment of current favorites. What is your favorite thing at the moment?
Cults, and specifically documentaries about cults. There's some great cult documentaries out there, and the one that I'm still like fixated on that I watched, I think a couple weeks ago now, was called so it's an HBO, or I guess it's called Max now, documentary called Love Has Won, The Cult of Mother God. highly recommend watching that. It was fascinating, like a train wreck. Like you can't stop watching, and you're feeling kind of disgusted and amazed. Yeah, there's just a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, sadly, I don't currently get Max, but if I ever do, I will be adding that to the top of my list because
Perfect.
it sounds like horrifying and fascinating.
Yes, yes.
My favorite thing is I don't know. Do you watch Hot Ones at all?
Hot ones?
It's like a interview show. Hot Ones, yeah, they eat hot wings.
No. Okay, I think I've heard about
Okay, definitely check that out because he interviews all these celebrities and it starts off like not spicy and then it gets up like in the hundreds of thousands of Scoville. And it's like a beautifully curated lineup of hot sauce. Well, you can buy these hot sauces, obviously. I bought one from the most recent lineup called Quesos and Queso. Yeah, I just instantly became obsessed with it. So it has like a cheesy flavor, but it's I think like a vegetarian like recipe and it just was so good on everything and of course now I'm out of it. But there is a local grocery store that specifically has stocked these hot sauces and so I told them they need to add this one cuz I would buy so many bottles. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds amazing. I am totally into hot sauces and special condiments. So
Oh yeah. And I mean we have like a huge assortment of hot sauces, but just like sometimes you find one that you're just like this is just such a perfect one and it's good with
yes,
all these different types of food and it just makes everything better. So this was one of those. It like really like rose to the cream of the crop.
yeah, that's one thing I miss about living in Lincoln and having access to Trader Joe's. Like, there's so many condiments they have that are incredible.
Yeah, well, and like I said, there's even like a local business now that does that too, and I love supporting
Yeah,
them. And I don't know, trying out a new hot sauce.
will do. I wrote it down. I'll look it up.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was amazing to hear you talk about your process and your influences, and I just can't wait to see where it goes for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For me, that discussion provided a great reminder that as artists, we're never creating in a vacuum. There are always creative influences to be found, whether that's someone within your medium, a painter or musician, or even random inspiration in the wild. If you were inspired by this episode, be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss any updates. Up next, baked goods for days. Ellie is an avid baker who loves sharing her treats with others and challenging herself in the kitchen. We talk about her baking projects, recipes that get passed down through the generations, and her favorite local bakeries. Plus, she encourages me to try making cinnamon rolls from scratch for the first time. You'll be able to listen to that episode on May 29th. Nerdlandia is hosted, produced, and edited by Emily Case Buskirk. Theme song and ending credits by Keith West. Cover artwork by Ellen Stubbings. Additional music by Alexi and Alex Goose from Pixabay. This episode is dedicated in memory of Stephanie Pershing.
And actually, I was thinking about this the other night. I skipped the first class so I could go with your Jared, to see Silver Linings Playbook in theaters. It was a great time.